welcome to the NDTV Dialogues. This week, we saw a new, unwritten chapter in India's history being created. A chapter which will perhaps best be judged by future generations. But what does this mean for the India of today? What does it mean for an India where the essence of democracy is now being looked at and rewritten, reframed perhaps? Well, we are here on the NDTV Dialogues with two people who are an integral part of the believers of dialogue in this country. As we debate and discuss, all of us agreed on one thing. As Indians, we believe in the greatness of this nation and the greatness of our Indian argumentative tradition. That's what we aim to focus on in NDTV Dialogues, and I'm very happy to have with me Shashi Tharoor and Jay Panda to be part of this dialogue. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you, Sonia.
Mr. Panda, as a representative of the ruling party, the one who has scripted this new chapter, what would you say are the implications of this week, not just for perhaps today, but for generations to come?
First of all, I'd like to say that this is not about the ruling party. This is about the Republic of India. This is an idea that has been cherished across the political spectrum. It's the biggest milestone in the history of the Republic since 1947. Even Prime Minister Nehru, when he spoke at the introduction of 370, expressed hope that this will be temporary and that it should be changed. And of course, it's been part of our party's manifesto. We've taken it to the people, and the people have given us a resounding endorsement to carry this forward. But it's essential for India, not for any particular party, for the following reason. The principle that the Constitution is sacrosanct and that every Indian should have the same rights and the same obligations goes to the root of any democracy, and we are the biggest democracy in the history of humankind. So this is such a fundamental shift. It's good for a variety of reasons. We've tried Article 370 for many decades. It wasn't working. I mean, you saw the continued terrorist attacks sponsored from across the border, including one just a day or so before this change in the Constitution. We've seen Pulwama, we've seen Uri, we've seen 2611, we've seen 4 wars started by our neighbor to the west. So something had to change, and the change that has happened is good for Jammu and Kashmir. It is good for India. Article 370 was very discriminatory. It discriminated against women. It discriminated against the LGBTQ community. It discriminated against Dalits and others. There are so many progressive laws passed by Parliament which are applicable all over India except Jammu and Kashmir. That had to change. It had to give way at some point, and it's a good thing that it has happened.
So Shashi, also taking your apolitical hat and looking at you as somebody who's been a part and observer of the Indian Republic, writing about it much before you even ventured into this world of politics. The idea is that this is fundamental to what our constitutional fathers actually envisaged.
It is, but not in the way Jay intends. The fact is, to paraphrase him, I would say this is not about my party. This is about India, the Indian Constitution, and Indian democracy. I find it quite ironic that his 3 principal points involved the sacrosanct nature of the Constitution, the persistence of terrorism, and discrimination. Let me take each of them in turn. Sacrosanctness of the Constitution is precisely what my speech in the Lok Sabha was about. Because what they have done is this most extraordinary thing of interpreting provisions in our Constitution in a way that even the most hardened cynic and 3 Supreme Court judgments have never found before. Number 1, the Constitution that requires the concurrence of the state for a change. They say the state's concurrence has been obtained because, of course, the state is under President's rule and the governor is the state. Second, the concurrence of the Constituent Assembly was required. They say, well, the Constituent Assembly has been replaced by the legislature, and since the state is under President's rule, the legislature is actually now the Parliament. Therefore, we're consulting you where we have a majority. So with the governor, you get the consent of yourself, because the governor is your appointee and your representative in the state. You get your own consent to call it concurrence. And then you get the consent of a parliament where you have a majority to deliver. Now, this may be, with very clever dancing on the head of a legal pin, it may be within the letter of the law, but it certainly does great damage to the spirit of our Constitution. What is worse, if I can talk about Indian democracy for a minute.
No, how does it? I just wanted to, because I heard your speech to elaborate that.
They did this with the entire democratically elected leadership of Kashmir under arrest, with 2 former chief ministers and 1 current MP under house arrest, and later, in fact, 2 of them are in detention in guest houses.
I must respond
and they did it with a total blackout imposed on Kashmir.
I'm actually
so to
going to
my
come back
mind, the
yes.
spirit of Indian democracy is lying in
No,
shreds.
I'm going to come back to that point, Shashi, because I think we're
and
perhaps...
terrorism, by the way, make it worse, not better, just to conclude on that point.
We're perhaps blurring 2 points there, and we will come back to the issue of what's happening to Indian politicians,
these are all
the
points
Kashmir
Jay made,
politicians.
I'm just responding.
No, but I want to come back to the spirit of the Constitution, because I think that point is something which has been asked, and I think, and said that, that even when Article 370 was passed, in the spirit of democracy and dialogue, there were many objections raised, and Pandit Nehru himself at that point, it's in the Constitution that it was temporary. Article 370 itself had been hollowed out over the years, as you've seen yourself, and interpretations of Constitution have been done by political parties across the years, including Indira Gandhi, who we've written about, and that's been done. So that's a legal issue that will come up in the Supreme Court. But in the spirit of democracy, the fact that equality, the fact that every Indian, whether he's in Kashmir or Kanyakumari, should ideally 70 years later have come to a stage where it is the same across states. Take revocation of special status. That's the point about spirit of democracy. Why do you think that's against spirit of democracy?
Because it requires the consent of a legislature that is simply not.
But in the principle, the principle of it.
No, the principle is, frankly, and the outcome. These are different issues. Had this been done in
is
a
the method also
manner,
democratic? The method also
is the method that is not democratic, because ultimately, had you had a legislature in session, consulted them, even if they had disagreed with you, you could have fulfilled the letter of the Constitution and the spirit at the same time. When the legislature has been suspended by you, and you have not consulted anybody who represents Kashmir directly, in a parliament where there are only 4 Kashmiris, one of whom is under house arrest, you're not exactly talking about Kashmiri opinion in any great detail. The fact is, in this situation, to actually go ahead and say that you have fulfilled what our Constitution requires you to fulfill is cynical in the extreme.
Look,
and that's what most people would say.
I'm going to get back on that point and come back on the other 2 points. But the spirit issue you haven't answered. I'll come back, but go ahead.
So first of all, on the spirit issue, I think many of Shashi's colleagues in the Congress are finally finding it impossible to abide by the party's diktat and are speaking out on conscience. And they are saying that, in principle, this was the right thing to have happened.
Though Shashi, of course, is not representing those colleagues. He's representing himself.
I think it's the point, he's representing more than himself. He's representing his party, as am I representing mine. So this is an important point about the principle. Now, regarding the method, now Shashi is very glib, and I think he may have got away with this if I wasn't prepared to answer this. So let me have
That's an unkind. I would say that he's more than glib.
Let me tell you why it is glib. The constitutional requirement for how 370 is to be amended has been specifically dealt with on several occasions, twice when the Congress was in government, and the exact same procedure has been followed. And let me point something out. I would urge Shashi to look at section 356, subsection 1, which was passed by Parliament just a few weeks ago. And in that, subsection 1 very specifically states, approved by Parliament and praised by Shashi's senior colleagues who are today railing against the removal of the abrogation of 370. Same colleagues who are railing against this, your colleagues, praised when section 356 was passed by Parliament just a few weeks ago, which very specifically provides that as per earlier precedents, if 370 is to be amended, the administration, which is the governor's opinion, is final if there is no assembly in place. So it's disingenuous to say that there was something wrong in the method. Exact precedence, exact prescription of the Constitution has been followed.
Well, the method is in the Supreme Court. It will.
I'm sure. Yes.
So that's
the legalities
everybody
of the
is
Supreme
entitled.
Court. The core question remains: you take a state of the Indian Union, and no one challenges that it was a state of the Indian Union till yesterday, and this state, you divide its territory, you create a union territory, you downgrade it to a union territory, this remaining portion of it, and you don't even consult anybody from there. To my mind, whatever Jay may say about the constitutional method of amendment, as I said, they might persuade the court that they have stuck to the letter of the law. They have clearly done violence to its spirit. The irony is the Supreme Court has actually considered this issue in 3 previous cases, a 1959 case of PM Cole, a 1969 case of Sampath Prakash, and just 2 years ago, a case about the State Bank of India in Kashmir in 2017. And in every case they said, sorry, 370 is not a temporary provision. De facto, because of usage, it has become a permanent provision. So the problem we've got today is you have been standing up in Parliament and dismissing this as a temporary provision. The time has come to get rid of it. You have not consulted the local representatives at all. You have not taken to the people. Instead, you've chosen to lock them up. And there is a complete curfew in town. You know, the Kashmiris can't even watch TV. They don't know what's going on.
That's not true. That's not true.
If they have a
TV is
satellite dish
available.
only. No,
no,
cable is not available. Listen, I've tried to call Kashmiri friends.
No, but
it says, sampark nahi ho sakta.
No, but surely the argument can't be that TV is available and phones aren't. But let's not get, as I said, I am going to go to that. But I want to just come back to this point, Shashi, because I do think that's an important core aspect when we look at the nature of this decision. I think, well, I absolutely agree that there is a debate about method, a debate about how it was done, how it was pushed through. I do think those will be coming to the legal thing. It will be in the Supreme Court. What I'm asking again is that was Article 370 an idea, a provision, a law which was against a larger integration of Jammu and Kashmir? And I think two statements. One was, I think, Karan Singh, ex-Sadr-e-Riyasat, which said, let's not look away at the many positives of this. And I think the Prime Minister's statement asking, no one could tell me what is the benefit of Article 370. What actually was it gaining the people of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh? Again, as I say, as a thinking Indian, somebody who's observed Indian democracy, can you disagree with the method, but perhaps accept that this is something which needed to be done or not?
Outcome is
because I'm not clear on what your view is on that.
No, my view is, I'm sorry, has been fairly clear. I'm not terribly comfortable with one of our states having its own term of office 6 years rather than 5, having its own flag, having its own constitution, though that constitution, whose Article 3 specifically states that Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of the Indian Union, actually is one of the important bridges that have linked Kashmir to India. So by abolishing the constitution, we've also cut that bridge, unfortunately, which is another mistake. But I'm not wedded. I am wedded to the fact that certain things by usage have sanctity. And one of the principles about 370, which everyone had accepted till today, including the BJP when it was in power for 3 years, is that it can only be amended in consonance with the wishes of the people as expressed in the Kashmir legislature. So my concern throughout, if you listen to my speech, it's only 15 minutes, you will hear repeatedly that when I've talked about it being a dark day for Indian democracy, not the abolition of 370, but the manner in which Indian democracy has been kicked in the pants while trying to come up with an outcome that many would applaud. I'm not saying that, for example, the discrimination point, I was going to say to Jay, I agree, but Farooq Abdullah himself, as the man who was likely to win the next Kashmir election, had said, we will move both the discrimination against women who are not permitted to marry outside the state and still retain their property rights, and the discrimination against other communities. And he had said, we are willing to present this to the next assembly. He had said this in an interview, I think, to your channel just a few days ago. So the fact is that that would have been the right way to do it. And I think all of us would have spoken in support of such a move and against any Kashmiri legislators who cited Sharia law or whatever to oppose this. That's fine. 35A was objectionable because of that provision. 370 was objectionable because of the two constitutions, two flags and so on, but was useful as a historically sanctioned link to India. There are only 3 links that the Kashmiris had to us. One was the instrument of accession, which unfortunately was very limited, only foreign affairs, defense and communications. And Maharaja Hari Singh in Article 7 said everything else, including all constitutional and territorial arrangements, I reserve the right to decide how much Kashmir will participate. It was that got converted into 370. So 370 became the second link and the Jammu and Kashmir constitution became the third link. Now, essentially, instrument of accession has been overtaken by events. Jammu and Kashmir constitution has been invalidated. Now 370 has been destroyed by proclamation. What link is there? This is the biggest worry that I'm sure will confront the court when they look at this.
No, so I'm glad you've given a clear answer, and I think that's a valid answer, that you're not wedded to the idea of Article 370. And I remember, of course, on 35A when there was much debate about it at that time as well. But Jay, come back on the 2 other points you raised.
Let me say, Modi ji said this to me at the end of the debate. We met briefly in the Speaker's office. His first comment was, you should have supported this because your late wife wanted it abolished.
I remember coming on NDTV and saying
against the way you've done it.
And against Article 35A, very vehemently opposing it.
The discrimination, why should any one of us want to support discrimination? It was a bad provision.
So let me now, Jay, ask you the points that Shashi made, the valid points, because I think if the first part of this argument is what the Prime Minister, Amit Shah and all of you had said is the reason for abolishing it, that stands. But really to say it will abolish terrorism, it will improve Jammu and Kashmir's status, because we've seen the indices that have shown that Jammu and Kashmir currently in many social indices, including poverty, is doing much better than Gujarat or UP and Bihar. And what is the link of terrorism to Article 370 is something which is completely unclear, because it's not that Pakistan will stop cross-border terrorism because India says, which is all maintain that the Kashmir is an integral part of India, including POK. What is the link of that and terrorism.
Let me humbly disagree.
Sure.
And I want to quickly reiterate that again, since Shashi has repeated it, he's wrong that the method is not correct. I have cited the examples before. Please, he was part of the decision just a few weeks ago to approve 56-1.
You have a brute majority in the Lok Sabha.
No, you guys agreed.
And I didn't participate in that debate.
You guys agreed. Your senior colleagues hailed the passage of 56-1 just a few weeks ago.
You managed to set a precedent 2 weeks ago. That was obviously
maybe they didn't know where it was being used, so they were ill-prepared for that.
If they don't read legislation that they themselves are supporting and hailing, and then rail against it a few weeks later, then I have nothing else to say about that. Now, regarding how this will help against terrorism and all that, first, let me be very clear.
There is no answer about the lockdown of Kashmir.
We'll come to that right after this. Yeah, we'll come to that right after this.
The fact is, when certain steps were taken 3 or 4 years ago, and the Indian government said that we will clamp down on some of these activities which are funding stone pelting, for instance. It was mocked just like this, that how will stone pelting be affected by demonetization, by certain other steps. Has stone pelting not stopped because of certain steps that were taken then? Let me tell you how terrorism will be impacted by this. You're right that Pakistan and its sponsored terrorists don't care whether there's 370 or there's no 370. Even with 370, they were constantly trying to destabilize India. And even now, they will constantly try to destabilize India. Their intent has not changed. Our ability is changing. Let me explain how. Number one, as a union territory, the union government has a much bigger stake in arranging the security arrangements. Now, the J&K constabulary have sacrificed many numbers of their members in this fight, but so also have federal forces. And this coordination between the two needs to be much more tight. Now, we've had similar situations in other parts of the country. But if you compare how the situation in the Northeast has evolved over the past many decades, you will agree that the security situation today is much better. But you can't say the same about Jammu and Kashmir. And so, as the Prime Minister has said, this is not a permanent decision that it will remain a union territory. As the situation returns to normalcy, it can go back to being a full-fledged state. Ladakh being a union territory was their own demand anyway. But in terms of dealing with terrorism, in terms of the resources available to Jammu and Kashmir, the integration of union services, you will have many more officers capable from all over the country to be able to serve there. You will have much more coordination in policy, principle and practice between the state constabulary and the union forces. This is how terrorism will be tackled better.
Well, let me ask you two counter questions to that. One, when we say returns to normalcy, the fact is that about 10 years ago, and I think it was perhaps after the tragic killings which had happened under Umar Abdullah's government, but within a few years of that, under UPA 2, there was a situation where things were much better. Tourism was having a record season, etc. And that actually deteriorated under the NDA, under the Modi government in the first, under the first term. I'll just, but also the larger fact, and I think this goes to the point of Shashi, and this you have seen, you have been in Parliament with Omar Abdullah, with Mehbooba Mufti, Farooq Abdullah. Omar Abdullah made that stirring speech at a time when you must have been in Parliament that I am an Indian and a Kashmiri Muslim. To now reduce them. And Omar Abdullah and Farooq Abdullah met the Prime Minister last week. They were given an audience. The Prime Minister assured that there's no plans to change the status of Kashmir of 35A or 370. 370 in fact was not considered, but perhaps 35A was discussed. Then to have these people put under house arrest, and in fact Omar Abdullah and Mehbooba Mufti are jailed. These are people who have been in alliance with the NDA, former Minister of State for External Affairs, former Chief Minister in alliance with the BJP. Are you now treating them as little better than terrorists?
So first, let me answer the first part of your question. The reality is, if you look at the past 70 years, it's always been up and down. Any time we felt that the situation is getting better, the deep state of Pakistan inevitably, invariably then upsets the apple cart. Now, we've seen this happen again and again. You said that things have deteriorated under the NDA government. That's not true. Modi ji reached out to them, went out to Pakistan, and the immediate retaliation was what happened in Pathankot, right? So let's not delude ourselves that at any time there was real normalcy. There were brief spells of Pakistan being distracted by Afghanistan.
The number of incidents and killings went up. Went up in the last 3 years.
It has gone up and down. It went up hugely in 1990 when lakhs of pundits.
91 was terrible.
No. So look, if you look at the entire span of things, when some people claim, including a fellow journalist of yours, that violence has come down, they compare it to 1990. Now, when you have genocide on the scale that you had in 1990, anything will look like it has an improvement. But the fact is, there was never stable, sustained, long-term peace in Jammu and Kashmir, as evidenced by continued attacks, the BAT attack of the Pakistani forces just a day or two before the parliamentary action.
Well, look at democracy, look at election figures, voter turnout. Look at that as an indication
it's gone
of
up and
normalcy.
down. It's gone up and down. And you know, the union governments at various times have also fiddled with Kashmiri democracy. And one of the reasons that couldn't be sorted out in the early days, in 1952 for instance, is because of this condition of 370. They were not, the election commission could not intervene and provide a just level playing field.
Well, overturning the Farooq Abdullah election was perhaps one of those turning points. And is the BJP government doing a similar thing now?
No. So I'll make a quick digression. When you mentioned that Farooq Abdullah ji said that they would bring in these changes, no, look, we've had 70 years. Farooq ji himself has been chief minister. His, Omar, who's a friend of mine, has been chief minister. Others have been. They've had plenty of time, and at some point things needed to improve.
But the price
now to come back to this. Look, there is a fundamental shift that is taking place. This is a fundamental paradigm shift, and if anybody were to treat this as just another legislative change, I think that is disingenuous, and I think it would be naivety on a scale that cannot be described, because there are all kinds of interference from Pakistan, from terrorist activity to funding activity to drug running, and if the kind of preventive measures that have been taken now were not taken, I fear we would have had mayhem in the valley. Now, this is not permanent, and yes, when senior politicians have been detained, technically it is jail, but they are in fact in the circuit house, in the what used to be the palace of the former ruler. It's not that anybody is put to any physical discomfort, but this is you must be also seeing videos from journalists and others on the ground that normalcy is gradually returning. You've seen traffic improving. Now you've seen the Prime Minister's statesman-like appeal that Eid should be celebrated free of violence and with participation and support of all communities. This is the spirit. This is the spirit that we want. There is no sense of triumphalism. The intention is that this is good for India, this is good for Jammu and Kashmir, and we will have a period when we have to be extremely wary of disruption that is fomented from across the border, and that's why these.
I agree with Jay about Pakistan's responsibility for these various spikes every time we have tried to make peace, and that is irrespective of government, our government or the BJP government. But I disagree with his complacency about terrorism, because in fact when he talks about the arrest of these people, maybe in comfortable circumstances, he omits the implications of that. You have basically rendered the democratic political parties who are committed to India powerless and irrelevant now to Kashmir and the solution for Kashmir, which means automatically, because politics abhors a vacuum, the space is enlarged for undemocratic forces. We already have the Hurriyat that is outside the mainstream. Beyond the Hurriyat, you have the terrorists and the separatists outside the mainstream. And Pakistan is going to be reinforced shortly when the Americans pull out of Afghanistan. There are a heck of a lot of idle mujahideen just looking for a place to go and keep themselves busy. Now they have a new casus belli. They have a new reason for fighting. This is my worry, because frankly, I saw the Abdullahs, the Muftis and all that, whatever their flaws may be, and Mr. Amit Shah was eloquent about those flaws,
and which
I saw them as a bulwark.
Yes.
I saw them as a bulwark against the resort to extremism. It's very simple. I mean, we've played this throughout the country. It's not just a Kashmiri issue. For example, one of the reasons we're strongly supportive of the Muslim League in Kerala is because if we don't have a party that is moderate in its expression of Muslim desires, that is secular in its political allegiances, and that, for example, is non-discriminatory, they educate women very brilliantly and so on in Kerala, the Muslim League does, then if we delegitimize them or made them irrelevant, essentially the community and the votes they get there would go off to far more radical elements or far bigger threat to our democracy. This logic is what we were also working on in Kashmir. Essentially now you've just destroyed these people. They don't have any relevance anymore.
I think Shashi has raised a valid point.
I
think he has raised a valid point.
And the point also, I just want to make a comparison on that. No, I just want to make a comparison also because of course you came from from the party earlier, Biju Patnaik, and the BJP brought up as anti-emergency. How do you not see this as a mirror of what happened with Indira Gandhi putting opposition leaders in jail with courts, etc., were rendered defunct in a sense in that time? What's the difference today?
I'll come back to that. But I think Shashi has raised a very valid question which needs to be answered. And we must listen to all objections with humility. Now, the concern that he has raised, that with political activity restrained for the time being, there is a vacuum and others will step in. We must see this in two ways. First of all, over the past so many decades, with full political activity, there was still no way to keep out all these, the separatists and terrorists, their funding, their violence and all of that. So it's not like the existing situation was working. Number two, this is no way a permanent restraint. This is a temporary restraint, and you will agree that this is such a fundamental shift in the structure of the Indian Union going back from 1947, that if you did not take special measures, there would have been mayhem. Please remember, democracy is not being taken away. Please remember, the rights of the people are not being taken away. Please remember, political activity is going to be resuming very shortly as normalcy returns. And please remember that there is more to democracy in Jammu and Kashmir than the 2 or 3 leading figures that you have mentioned. The Prime Minister's appeal to the youth, the Prime Minister's appeal to the recently elected Panchayat office bearers to participate, to revive Jammu and Kashmir. These are all important facts that you must take into being. And as I said, this look, anybody that says that if these special security restraints were not put into place, things would have been hunky-dory, I think they are either naive or they are being cynical, because we would have had a completely chaotic situation.
Jay, Pulwama happened under governor's rule, under president's rule. So how would you blame that on the chief ministers who are ex-chief ministers?
No, I'm not blaming that on the chief ministers.
No, but when you say that terrorism, it was, I mean...
Terrorism has been sustained for all these decades.
But being under president's rule or governor's rule or union territory doesn't necessarily change that. We've seen that with Pulwama.
Look. Let me address the cynical response that is sometimes made. So when Pulwama happened, the allegation was, how come you did not have intelligence on it? When the Amarnath Yatris were turned back because of specific intelligence, then the allegation is, how come you are not able to manage it? Why are you evacuating them? So this kind of cynicism has no place in proper dialogue. So let's not get into that kind of cynicism.
Well,
the fact is,
questioning surely should have a place in dialogue.
I understand, but you can't have double standards. So, for example, 26/11 happened, despite having had many other incidents of terrorism. Why did it happen?
It was a failure of the government of the time
not
and
just
intelligence.
That. Look, not just that. And of course, our systems have improved since 26/11. But it's not just a failure of the government or intelligence. It is a sustained effort by the other side. And of course, India is continuing to take all kinds of measures to counter that. And to a large degree, it is succeeding. Now, you have geopolitical issues in Afghanistan, and that may give, Pakistan has been basically selling its geographical importance to reducing itself to what it has become and to becoming a pain in the neck for India. But despite that, we have been overcoming that. We will overcome that. And for the period that Jammu and Kashmir is a union territory with elected legislatures, with legislature and an elected chief minister, we will have a better ability to deploy our security forces and take measures against terrorism.
What about the emergency aspect I brought up? Why is this different from Indira Gandhi's emergency, at least in terms of Jammu and Kashmir?
So there was no huge amount of terrorist activity that created the emergency-like situation. Mrs. Gandhi...
Indira Gandhi, by the way, quoted that. She said that there was danger of an internal war.
She pointed to Jay Prakash Narayan as the danger to India, which I don't agree.
Well,
I don't think...
That wasn't the unit.
Look, I think if you compare Jay Prakash Narayan on the same level of danger to India as Hafiz Saeed, then there's something fundamentally wrong.
No, so, the comparison is to Farooq Abdullah and Mehbooba Mufti.
No. Her attack was on Jay Prakash Narayan's movement. The current situation is not about anybody in India. It is about the people like Hafiz Saeed and Pakistan's
No, I'm asking on the leaders being arrested, that aspect.
Let me explain. So, Mrs. Gandhi, she had her own good qualities. But the fact is that the emergency was imposed in her own self-interest because of the Allahabad court judgment. Here, this is not done with anybody's own personal self-interest or any party's self-interest. This is being done for India's good, as many of his colleagues are agreeing that this is for India's good. So let's not bring it, compare it to something which had very different circumstances. So all I'm saying is, the circumstances were very different in 75. The motivations were very different in 75. Here the motivations are in national interest, as agreed to by many senior members of the Congress and others. If this temporary restraints were not put into place, anybody that says that things would have been fine is not right.
Those of my colleagues who have been hailing the outcome are talking about the outcome. They're talking about the end product, and obviously everyone hopes that in the end this will be a new normal. But at the moment it's not normal. There is a clampdown in Kashmir. There's a total blackout on the people of Kashmir. When I was heckled, when I asked when will Achhe Din come, and the people in the BJP side said it's already come with today to the Kashmiri people, I said, in that case, tell me, when will they be able to take their children to school? When will they be able to watch TV? When can they go to a store and buy groceries? When that happens, we'll start talking about Achhe Din. So the fact is, the conditions under which this has been imposed are actually shame-making for Indian democracy. They have basically been done because the government is unwilling and unable to do such a thing in the open. Now, Gandhiji told us, frankly, that your means have to be worthy of your ends. If a noble end was pursued through ignoble means, Gandhiji wanted no part of it. He called off the civil disobedience movement when
but many of his cabinet didn't agree with him. Not of his cabinet, but many of his
didn't agree with him at that time. He's being cited regularly by the present Prime Minister and the government. His glasses are the symbol of the Swachh Bharat movement. He had also said that your cleanliness starts in the mind, in the spirit, in the intention. Such Saaf Niyat was supposed to be one of the BJP slogans. Where is the Niyat here? You see, if we start judging everything by outcome. No, I want to say this because my dear friend Jay, whom I've known in happier times when he was not associated with such cynicism in the ruling party, actually used the word principle more than once in answering your question. To my mind, the only problem, or the principal problem here, is the lack of principle. That there is really a cynical desire to cast aside our reputation as a land of laws, as a tradition of democratic decency, as a culture of consultation and discussion.
Shashi, are you underestimating what Jay also put as the fundamental paradigm shift we're seeing? Because while there may be merit in your argument, there is also the argument that this is a fundamental paradigm shift. Things are if we had kept discussing and the consultation, etc., it would never have happened. What was meant to be for 3 years has only now been overturned in 70 years. In fact, I saw an interesting parallel to China today in one of the newspapers, saying that perhaps we are moving now towards a result-oriented democracy, the Indian version, and now the Indian people want to see results. Envisaged, again, we've seen that in one historic mandate, and as Yashwant Sinha also said this week, that today if the BJP went to election, they would beat Rajiv Gandhi's historic mandate.
Let me just say that our job in the opposition is to point to the dangers the government may not have thought of. Certainly, I've had a minister from the government, and I cannot name him because of a private conversation, tell me as recently as yesterday that many of the things that I raised in Parliament have given them cause to reflect. The truth of the matter is, I would like to be wrong. I would like there to be no extra terrorism. I don't disagree with Jay that there was terrorism anyway before, and this will not make it worse. Well, I hope he's right that it won't make it worse. When you say that terrorism will continue, and at the same time you completely narrow the space for democratic alternatives, will the public in Kashmir, and particularly in now the Kashmir Valley, I'm not talking about Ladakh, which is what the BJP diverts the conversation to, I'm not talking about Jammu particularly, but will the people in Kashmir really see this as, the political process, the elections he says will take place, the resumption of democratic activity, as a viable thing when the people who they had elected so recently, and they had alternation of governments, when these people have been humiliated and locked up and not consulted on the most important decision of their political lives.
Because you're still not getting into the paradigm shift, but go ahead.
So, I think Shashi, for the most part, was just repeating the old arguments, alleging cynicism and lack of process. I've answered that twice before, so I'll leave that part apart. He raised an important question, that when will Achhe Din come? And I implore him, and I implore everybody across the political spectrum, why don't we start treating this Eid as the beginning of Achhe Din? Why don't we all work together? Because there is, as I said, there is no triumphalism in this. This is in India's interest. Let us at least recognize some of the signs of gradual restoration of normalcy, like traffic improving. We've seen videos come out from the valley, from Srinagar. The threat still exists. No, look, let's not be cynical. This response is left to the DG of police there. This is not something that is decided in Delhi as to is the situation normal enough for the restrictions to be lifted.
I think it's fair to say we don't have an accurate picture at all, you, me or him. None of us have an accurate picture, so let's leave that point. The full authority has been given to the police authorities there to relax. Can I implore all of us to work together to restore that normalcy as soon as possible, to actually celebrate some of the signs of improvement
and not to keep talking cynically and to treat this Eid as the beginning of Achhe Din in Jammu and Kashmir.
Jay, I proposed an all-party delegation to go and see for ourselves. I got no answer. And I would like to ask you, as a BJP representative, convey that proposal. If we want to have everyone work together, then give everyone equal access. Let us all go. You've turned away now 2 leaders from Srinagar Airport. I don't know what else is going to happen to others. All I can say is, at some point, maybe today is the wrong day, maybe it should be next week or even 2 weeks from now, whatever. At some point, but in the immediate aftermath, give us a reason to agree with you that we should be with you on this by actually going and seeing the condition for ourselves. If you keep people under a curfew, don't let them lead a normal life, you postpone exams, shut universities, parents can't take their kids to school, and then you expect us to join you, I'm sorry, as a Democrat,
this is all based on threat perceptions. Those leaders who are trying to go into Kashmir today are not talking about reconciliation, they are not talking about normalcy, they are trying to rile up the emotions of the people.
Yeah, I think that's
as and when
I don't think
as
you
and when
or anyone
normalcy
gets to
returns.
decide that as a politician.
No, I don't get to decide it.
Yeah.
The local police authorities get to decide when the threat level is something that is manageable. You know, things have been relaxed gradually, step by step, over the past 3 days. So it has not returned to full normalcy. That is not something that I will decide or the union government sitting in Delhi will decide. The local police authorities, the DG of police, will have to certify that the things are controllable. And I'm sure full normalcy will return.
One aspect this debate would be incomplete without, because we saw it so much in Parliament, was really, I said that this chapter in history will be judged by future generations. But how, but using also what's happened today, as you said, this fundamental paradigm shift, to actually go back and rewrite this kind of divisiveness between our constitutional creators, our founding fathers. This one would have done it differently, X would have done it differently. Pandit Nehru was to blame for this. The Prime Minister thanked all various others except Pandit Nehru and said their dream has come true. Doesn't that add to the divisiveness you're actually talking about when we look at the rewriting of history when we do this today?
It's not rewriting, it is acknowledging
reinterpretation.
History. No, it's not reinterpretation. Look, I don't want to fan the flames or add any salt to anyone's wounds, but a lot of statements have been made by some people in Parliament which are not accurate. If you want to know about Sardar Patel's views, his direct assistant has written a book that cites in great detail what the Sardar's attitude was. But I would, what has been said, what has been written is history. Some people might have cited it to put some context into it, but I agree with you. Let us not try to re-examine history. It happened in a certain context. What Pandit Nehru did, what Sardar Patel did, is all part of history. We should look at what is good for India, what is good for Jammu and Kashmir, and I think this is good for India and good for Jammu and Kashmir, and work to implement this properly.
Final thoughts, Shashi Tharoor. Are we really seeing now the emergence? I mean, of course, you will have some views on history. Again, as I said, in your hat, in your robe, avatar perhaps as an author and somebody who studied Indian history, but also looking at, if you were to write a book, you've already written one book on the Prime Minister, but if you were to write a book 20 years later, are we seeing the emergence of a Modi doctrine? And perhaps because this doctrine has not fit in with the Indian, say, ebbs and flows that we've seen in the democracy, even the Vajpayee doctrine is completely different from the Modi era, if you want to call it that. Are we seeing that today? And that perhaps it's the clashes between those civilizational ideas of India, which you said in your Lok Sabha speech, which is emerging.
I don't disagree with that, and to that degree the paradigm shift Jay talks about maybe even more far-reaching than just Kashmir, because there's an increasingly perceptible shift in a significant portion of our population's understanding of what India is all about, which certainly does not correspond to the ideas, the vision, the manner of proceeding that people in India grew up with of early generations. I mean, we've done things in a certain way, and you're quite right, Vajpayee was much closer to Nehru than he is to Modi in terms of his way of functioning and his policies and his approach, even if his ideals were different, and I'm sure Modi ji is right that he would have applauded what happened today as an outcome. I think when it comes to these ideas of managing diversity, of celebrating pluralism, of accommodating differences, of working through consultation and consensus, that was Vajpayeeji's style. It is not Mr. Modi's and Mr. Shah's style. So the worry I have is, see, democracy is more than just having or winning elections. It's about how you conduct yourself in the 5 years till the next election. It's the way in which you bring others along. I've had conversation with Jay when he was in the opposition about how the opposition can enlarge the space for itself within our democratic process in the legislature. We've lost, we accept our defeat, but Give us a chance to raise issues that we consider also important, that kind of issue. We've talked about that. He's even published some opinions that I've agreed with on this. The truth is, this is not the BJP's inclination. And we are finding with the present approach, yes, a certain robustness granted, a certain muscularity, which they do celebrate. I'm glad Jay says there is no triumphalism, and arguably the PM's speech yesterday confirms that. But there has been, as part of their, shall we say, propaganda overall, an advertising of sort of masculine muscularity, which has become indelibly associated with the image of this Prime Minister and this government in ways that are deliberate. That's by design. The BJP has promoted that notion. Just as they caricatured my party president as you know, a pappu and so on, they have been building up these images. The question is, how do you now take it forward in a way that also preserves the essence of our democracy? On that, the jury is open. I can't give you an answer. I'm very disturbed and worried by what I've seen in the last 3-4 days. But if people like Jay approach this in the right spirit within their party, and they try and take us along. I remember much earlier in a speech on a different bill saying, "Hame bhi saath le chaliye." Everything doesn't have to be confrontational. You know, when we give constructive suggestions for amendments, accept some of them. The Congress did when we were in power. Minor things, non-political things, things that simply improve a bill. But the BJP comes with a steamroller bulldozer attitude. Everything that comes, they have to vote on a whip. Even the most reasonable things that their own MPs are nodding their heads when we describe them, they vote against because that's not in their bill. You know, there's this complete lack of desire to accommodate other opinions politically that I find deeply troubling. And I certainly hope that Jay's spirit will be the one that prevails and not what we've seen so far.
Final words with you, Jay.
So I think Shashi did a phenomenal job of walking the tight wire. I acknowledge the compliments that he gave to the Prime Minister's speech. I think there is a sense of pessimism, perhaps even a degree of cynicism. I don't agree with Shashi.
None of us in this table are cynics.
The BJP is not divisive. Doing away with 370 is exactly the opposite of because 370 and 35A is what was enshrining divisiveness by creating separate rights for different groups of people and citizens. Doing away with it is the greatest sign that we are not divisive. And this, as I said, this is not about the BJP. This is not about the party. It's about the nation. And I don't think we need to worry that Prime Minister Modi is you know, fundamentally different from Vajpayee ji, who was closer to Nehru. That's not true. I believe Vajpayee ji is much closer to Prime Minister Modi than he was to Nehru ji.
I said in his manner.
You know, as a counter to the concerns that he raised, I believe history will look back to this moment and this Prime Ministership with great admiration. I believe Modi ji will go down as the greatest Prime Minister we've had till date. That's my belief. Time will tell.
Thank you both, Jay Panda, Shashi Tharoor, for being part of this dialogue. As I said, dialogue is the essence of our Indian democracy. I hope we see much more of that, and of course, with both of you. Thank you both very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.